Azoth by Zeitgeistic. Chapter 9. Inhibition. Inhibition. The process of holding back or restraining. Fuck it, Harry thought as he walked past the magical pet shop window on his way up to Hogwarts and felt two black-rimmed eyes following him. He stopped, annoyed with himself, then turned back and entered the shop. Putting on his "don't mind me, just browsing" facade, he came round to stare at the grey kitten, now somewhat larger, in the pen by the window. "Anything I can help you with, dear?" asked the shop witch. She came up to him, followed his line of sight down to the cat. "Last one left. She'll be here a while, I'm afraid. Oh, dear." "Why?" She looked like a perfectly normal cat to Harry, and everyone liked kittens, didn't they? Even if they looked like they were wearing NHS glasses and had astigmatism. "Bit of a squib, that one." She paused to chuckle at her joke. "Full-blooded Neasel, and not a drop of magical prowess in her whatsoever." "She's not as smart as other Neasels," guessed Harry, who wasn't aware that Neasels had any magical prowess to speak of. Crookshanks was a dab hand at catching Animagus Death Eaters, but it wasn't like he could apparate. The cat seemed to bristle for a second, but then it turned away and curled up on the floor of the pen. Harry's brow furrowed. Could cats be dejected? "Oh, she's plenty smart. Just don't do you a lick of good when it comes to ward setting. That's all anyone ever wants an easel for, really. Good for detecting things that aren't what they seem, and good for knowing when things aren't what they're supposed to be, too. Helps with monitoring wards and putting them up. Also work as pocket sneakoscopes if you can stand the fur on your cloak. But not this one." "Even normal cats are good at that sort of thing," said Harry, dubiously. The witch hummed, obviously unwilling to disagree with a potential customer, no matter how much she might like to. He kneeled, reached out to run a finger over the cat's ear. It flicked once, and he thought he was in for being ignored, but slowly one eye opened and regarded him, almost hesitant. Feeling emboldened, he rubbed along her head, and soon the cat was purring. Quiet, without his permission, Harry began to smile. Fucking Malfoy. Somehow, this was his fault. "If you say so." Harry looked up at her, smiling. From the cat's reluctant purse, his fringe fell aside, and he knew the moment when she spotted his scar. "Mr. Potter!" Inwardly sighing, outwardly smiling, he rose and accepted the handshake she was offering. "Any pet you'd like, any pet at all. I can't thank you enough for what you did." "I like this Neasel," he said. The cat's ears twitched again, as if startled by this pronouncement. "Oh, but surely not. A squib Neasel for the boy who lived. We have some beautiful snowy owls, and much better suited for a wizard of your—" "No," he said. She stopped talking at the tone of his voice. He followed it with the PR smile he was developing just in case. "I'd like the Neasel, please. How much?" "Gratis, of course." "I'd rather not receive preferential treatment." She fluttered a hand at him. "As you say, Mr. Potter. But even if I weren't inclined to, that cat isn't worth anything to a wizard. I couldn't charge anyone for her." Harry blinked, momentarily startled by the effect those words had on him. Who disregarded a life like that because it couldn't be used for some specific task? He reflected on how lonely it got without Hedwig, without Draco. He could use a new friend, and there was always value in that. "She's worth something to me, so I'd like to pay for her." 4 galleons, and 15 minutes later he emerged from the shop, being led tentatively along by the cat, who wasn't quite sure about the leather Neasel lead she was strapped into. The cat sniffed at an apple core on the cobbles, looked back up at him with huge, intelligent eyes. Harry sighed. So he had a pet again. "All right, to the school. Do you know how to get to Hogwarts?" The cat blinked at him once. Then it turned and set off directly for the path that led back to the castle. No magical prowess, my ruddy arse, Harry thought. She might not be any good at word-setting, but Harry didn't know of any mundane cats who understood English. No wonder this one had a complex. If he'd been in that shop listening to people call him a squib for all 8 months of his life, he'd have one too. In addition to the other complexes he had, like being unable to stop thinking about Malfoy even though it was over, hadn't really even begun, and there were plenty of kelpies in the sea. McGonagall called the first faculty staff meeting of the year on the morning of 1st of September. Harry had overslept. He did that sort of thing sometimes, especially when he was overwrought about seeing Draco the next morning and he had a new Kneazle who wanted to explore every bloody thing in his new room, but didn't have any magic to keep things from falling off wardrobes when she knocked them over. Thus, he was last to arrive at the staff room, and of course there was only one empty seat remaining. The one next to Draco. His Kneazle trotted him after him. He refused to stay behind, and her caterwauling was not something he would willingly suffer. Curled up on a step and immediately went to sleep. He felt eyes on him, cut his own to the right, and was simultaneously pleased and dismayed to find Draco smirking at him. His grey eyes flicked from Harry to the cat and back to Harry again. Cleared his throat as if nervous. "Jollies?" he asked. In that moment, Harry had never felt a more profound guilt than he did for not writing his condolences over the summer. Broken up, is that what they were, or not? He should have acknowledged Draco's pain, even if he despised the man who died, even if he'd been the one who said he couldn't deal with being friends and not more. Harry had owed him that much. Harry scoffed, forced a smile. As if. Body? She's a girl. Draco shrugged and turned his gaze to the agenda McGonagall was passing out. Across the room, Neville, Luna, and Hermione were all bunched up on the cosy-looking couch, with Millicent sulking about by the fire. He was really here, wasn't he? Apprenticing. "What a lovely feline," said Professor Sprout to his right. He caught Hermione giving him a very pointed look. It said, "A cat? Really? Kneazle? It looks full-blooded." "Oh, she is," said Harry. "Oh, lovely," Sprout said, nodding. "Kneazle are superb for ward-setting." "Not this one. She's great, yeah?" Perhaps it was his imagination, but the cat's purring seemed to increase in favour when he said that. He scratched her behind the ears, and she made a terribly endearing little meow sound, stretched her toes, and went back to sleep. "Mr. Potter," McGonagall said, "I can appreciate a fine cat as well as the next witch, but if you don't mind, we do have a meeting to attend to. Perhaps we could save the pet-related discourse for lunch." Harry fought down a flush with an arcane strength he'd not known he possessed. "Yes, Professor. Sorry." He could bloody feel Malfoy smirking. "Introductions are in order, I think," McGonagall continued. She held an arm out, indicating the woman to her right, and with a start, Harry realized that he'd met her before. The night he first met this woman, he and Draco had spent hours together, and for the first time not argued once. "Our new potions mistress, Senorita Miguela Calderao, comes to us by Horace's recommendations. Professor Calderao received her mastery in theoretical and applied potions under apprenticeship with Brown Brewer, Agnes Laure Pascal, and until recently had the spot of first brewer for the President of Portugal. Please welcome her." Miguela, cool and collected, thanked the staff for their welcomes and offered nods to both him and Draco. Harry relaxed some. At least he wouldn't be subjected to someone who hated him. Snape could handle that for everyone. "And of course, this year's batch of apprentices, Hermione Granger and Millicent Bulstrode, both of whom Professor Vector has agreed to take on. Harry Potter, fulfilling a rather unconventional apprenticeship under Professor Snape. Luna Lovegood, whose remarkable proposal convinced Professor Flitwick to take her on without gap year. Neville Longbottom under Professor Sprout, Ambrose Cadwallader, now entering his second year under Professor Hagrid, and Draco Malfoy, who will be continuing the most beautiful and majestic magic of transfigurations under myself. Several discreet coughs sounded, but McGonagall pretended to ignore them. Finally, Professor Vector said, "A large crop this year?" "Of Gryffindors," Draco added under his breath. Harry scowled at him. "A few orders of business, and then I'd see the first-year apprentices. Firstly, Professor Switch will finally be taking on the role of head of Gryffindor. If you have any issues with Gryffindor students—" "If," said Professor Sinistras and Snape's portrait at the same time. He shared a speaking look. "Then I do ask you to send them to Mervyn instead of me." Professor Switch rolled her eyes. Mervyn, Harry thought. Sometimes he forgot that teachers even had first names. She taught him just last year, and now he had to call her by her first name. Weird. "And secondly," McGonagall said, smiling rather like a cat cornering a mouse, "I would like to welcome back for his second year as Dada Professor, Professor Finlay Hound." McGonagall smirked all through the cheers that rose up and filled the room. Harry hadn't even noticed Hound off in the corner, half hidden by his hair, with his legs bent up in his chair, but he grinned and waved at them all. Even Harry, who'd always forgotten his name last year. "I think I called him Professor Horn sometimes," Harry whispered to Draco. As soon as he did, he remembered. They weren't friends anymore. They weren't anything. It was so easy to forget. To his surprise, Draco's lip curled up, and he glanced at Harry quickly before looking away again. But he said, sotto voce, "You did, frequently. I was embarrassed for you." "What?" he whispered. His face heated up, and he tried to hide it in the voluminous collar of his black apprentice robes. "Afraid so." "Something you'd like to share, Apprentice Malfoy?" McGonagall said. Draco immediately straightened, and the moment was gone. Harry would not feel bereft. "Stop looking at him," Millicent had advised. It was good advice. Harry knew well how boggarts worked. Sometimes it was weird that the absence of Draco hadn't been his boggart. Sometimes it was hard to remember a time when Harry didn't want to be around him nearly as much as he wanted to breathe. "No, Professor." McGonagall did not look impressed, but turned back to other matters. Harry listened with half an ear, too intrigued by the grey tartan detailing on Draco's navy apprentice robes. The McGonagall colours looked rather nice on him. Much posher than Harry's plain black ones. Since Snape didn't have family colours, he got to choose Harry's robes, and he'd chosen black. At least it had the fitted chest and fell loose about the legs like the robe Snape always favoured. It practically screamed brooding potions master, which Harry suspected could be rather sexy in the right hands. He was determined to be those right hands. Later on in his room he was going to try that billowing thing Snape used to do. There was probably a spell involved. The professors began filing out. When the room cleared and it was just McGonagall and the apprentices left, McGonagall conjured a tea service and floated out a stack of papers while they served themselves. "Here are your information packets, including the requirements of your apprenticeship, standards for publication of your final project, and rules and other miscellanea you will find useful during your tenure here." The packet was at least 50 parchment thick. Gross. "However, the main reason I've had the 6 of you back is to remind you of your required cross-subject project due at the end of your first year. You may work separately or in pairs, and the field of study is negotiable. The only requirement is that you demonstrate the relevance of another subject to that of your own. In the past, there have been very successful pairs between astronomy and divination, for example, as well as potions and herbology and charms and data. You have any number of options. Produce original work. This is in addition to your final capstone within subject required for mastery." Can we work with subjects that Hogwarts doesn't offer? Hermione asked.
Within reason,
McGonagall said.
What did you have in mind?
Hermione chewed up her lip. Well, I'd like to pair arithmancy and magical Renaissance art. McGonagall looked pained.
Speak to Professor Vector and me later, Granger. Any other questions? No? Good. I accept all of you to be present and on time for the welcoming feast tonight. Potter, no Neasels at the head table. She'll have to stay in your rooms.
He nodded, but McGonagall was already on her way out. Being headmistress was apparently a rather busy affair. He supposed that was to be expected, especially today.
Drarry, Malfoy, wait, Harry said.
What was possessing him to set himself up for this humiliation? A small part of his brain was wondering. The other was focusing on the fact that Draco had stopped, turned, was now looking at him. Harry felt his face heat and had no idea why. This was his fault, he reminded himself. He just couldn't stand having nothing to do with Draco Malfoy.
Back to surnames, are we?
Said Draco. The evenness of his voice helped Harry's racing heart a little. Harry shrugged, frowned.
I can never tell what you want.
No, Draco said, studying his face quite intently.
I suppose you can't. What is it? I thought we could work together. I know that
He stopped, deciding that that was exactly the wrong thing to say.
Remember what Miguela said. We need change. It's part of us. It's why we choose the subjects we did. I had all summer to change myself, and now I want to know if that offer is still open. The one where we could still be friends. We worked well together once.
Draco hesitated. The staff room was empty. The fire crackled in the hearth, and it sounded so intimate and domestic that Harry couldn't help imagining what it would be like to have Draco as his friend again. Just the two of them, maybe flatmates, maybe forever. And he'd come home from the lab at night, and Malfoy would come home from wherever it was Transfigurates worked, and they'd lounge in front of the fire together, shoes off, scarves tangling. God, this had to stop. He was such a creeper sometimes. Love was really not Harry's thing, probably. He was such a liar. Could never fall out of love with Draco, no matter how hard he tried.
Are you sure this time?
Harry nodded firmly.
I'm sure.
Maybe it was his imagination, but he would have sworn that Draco smiled for the briefest of seconds.
All right, Potter. What did you have in mind for a project?
Harry grinned, relief flooding him.
Alchemy?
Draco wasn't quite the same, really. Harry again felt guilty for failing to write over the summer.
What a rotten son of a bitch Lucius Malfoy was,
he thought, and yet Draco loved him. Merlin, Harry was an awful person for not being sorry Lucius Malfoy was dead. Except he was sorry. He was sorry Draco had known what it was like to feel free for a while, and some big-goated aura ruined it for him. It was all he could think about as he watched the students file in from the carriages for another year at Hogwarts. It had been raining, and the second and third years were rather damper than they might have been. "Can you believe it, Harry?" Hermione whispered. She was so excited to be sitting at the head of the table, even as she was absently tugging at the fitted sleeve of her robes. Vector's green and yellow family colours weren't bad on her, they were better on Millicent.
It's weird,
he decided. Malfoy slunk in and took the seat next to Harry just as Flitwick began leading the first years through. Harry stiffened, tried to hide his surprise, but he wasn't sure if he was successful or not. Maybe they were talking again. He wasn't entirely sure if the project carried over in their social lives.
I hope McGonagall didn't see me,
Draco murmured. Harry craned his neck down to the middle of the table and found McGonagall's sharp green eyes glaring back at them.
She did, mate.
Fuck. He'd already slipped back into that little place where he and Draco were friends, and it was only the first day back. How was he going to do 3 years with him like this, when every moment without him was like scraping open a slowly healing wound? Fuck, said Malfoy, not exactly quiet.
Shut up, Malfoy,
said Neville. The acoustics are really good in here. He nodded to the students seated closest to the head table, who all had wide, scandalized eyes turned towards the end of the table where the apprentices were sat. And further down the table, McGonagall was sending them death glares again. "Bollocks," Malfoy muttered, much more quietly this time. Several students gasped, looked at Harry. One side of his mouth curved up in a grin, unrepentant. Harry laughed, and no one realized it was just a little forced. Merlin, how he wanted him. Took a sip of pumpkin juice, looked anywhere but at Draco. Una peered around, caught his eye. Her pale brows lifted. She pulled out a necklace with a pendant shaped like a greyhound, and began counting beads on it like it's a rosary. Fuck, he was lost. Everything changed. Everything stayed the same. A week in, and Harry'd only left the dungeons for meals. Even his room were down there, isolated from everyone else's except Miguela, who was housed a corridor away. Snape had him testing new bases made from poisonous mushrooms, and it was exhausting work, but he absolutely loved it. And that was such a revelation that it floored him when he had time to stop and think about it. It was just so cool to do experiments all day. He felt like he was in primary school with the clay volcano spewing bicarb and hydrogen peroxide. He made explosions on purpose, and Snape was pleased with him for it. It really just didn't get any better. "Notice the disparity in explosion altitude between the pure silver and the adulterated silver compounds, Mr. Potter?" said Snape from his Caravaggio. "What can you tell me from that?" "Pure silver's the fourth least reactive element," Harry said, thinking. "The adulterated silver had an explosion twice as high and big as the pure one did. Whatever's mixed in with the silver is probably 4 times as reactive as silver, assuming the quantity of the pollutant is the same as that of the silver." Snape grinned. It was close to a sneer, but Harry could tell the difference now. "Good, Mr. Potter. Now take a sample of the adulterated silver. Your assignment for the evening is to find 2 spells that will tell you each of the elements in your compound, 3 spells that will tell you the proportions, and 1 that will separate them. You will write for me 3 feet on the process of discerning when a metalloid ingredient is contaminated with what and how to best purify it." The other system worked out now. Harry had a little oil painting of a desktop and some new quick-drying oil-based ink. He wrote all of his assignments on the parchment on the canvas's desk for Snape to pick up and read. It was ridiculous. It was great. No one else had a dead master. "Brewing time is logarithmically inverse to length of effect. You know that, Potter," Snape said upon returning his latest essay. "Stop pretending to be a moron." Hermione teased him relentlessly when he rushed in late for meals, his hair still curling at the nape from brewing steam, his mouth unable to frown. He never realized what a hide was to create something, to feel magic seeping out of his skin and into something, to make something meaningful, even if it was just a mistake. Most of the time Draco would sit next to him, and most of the time he'd have that same look on his face, like Transfigurations was something ineffable, something that took him elsewhere. And they were maybe friends again, just like last year. And just like last year, it was both freeing and confining, both wonderful and misery-inducing to be around him so much, and always have that line drawn between them. On the side, they were friends. They had undercurrents of something more, and Draco was free. On the other, they were more. Harry knew the taste of Draco's sweat-soaked skin, and Draco wasn't free, apparently. Harry was incurably in love with Draco Malfoy, and it was the most awful thing in the entire world. But he was happy anyway. He had potions and explosions and 2-3 really great best friends. And Draco turned to him first when he had something witty to say at tea in the staff room. Love, Harry figured, didn't have to be returned to be brilliant. Although it would have been great if it had been. It didn't matter how much he wanted him, it only mattered that this was what made Draco happy. So Harry would keep his distance and learn to stay happy being Draco's best mate. It was enough. A knock came at his portrait one night, and he waved his fingers vaguely in that direction to open the door, too engrossed in the September Ars Alchemica to get up himself. A shadow fell over his page, and it didn't have a large boshy area at the top like Hermione's did. Looked up, inhaled sharply, and saw Draco in his rooms.
I wasn't expecting you.
Draco lifted an eyebrow.
Who were you expecting?
Dunno, Harry said.
No one really, but Hermione and Millicent come by sometimes.
I thought we ought to start planning for our inter-subject project.
Oh, right.
Harry jumped up and, noticing the disarray of his sitting room, sent everything back to its place with a few pointed gestures and annoyed looks. Draco watched him, and it occurred to Harry that it was the wondrous magic again. Maybe he hadn't forgotten how to do it. He'd only wanted to keep trying for Draco, after all. A harassed yelp came from his wardrobe as his last jumper flew in, and then his Kneasel jumped out, her face covered by the same.
"Oh, darling,"
Harry said to her when she stumbled piteously up to him for help. He helped her pull her head out of the sleeve and sent it back to the wardrobe again. She meow in thanks, and he pet her ears until she started rolling around on her back.
"There's my girl."
"You never said what you named the cat."
"She's a Kneasel," Harry said, "and I haven't named her."
Draco took it upon himself to sit on the couch, which was all right as far as Harry was concerned. He felt like that Draco felt like he didn't need an invitation at his place.
"Are you sure? She doesn't feel like she's attached to your room's wards."
The cat turned to Draco, staring at him dully through her big black-rimmed eyes. Harry rubbed her tummy, and she made a rumbly noise.
"She's a squib."
And before Draco could comment on that,
"And she's great."
Draco only raised an eyebrow.
"She still needs a name. Are you sure you don't call her Jollies when no one's around?"
"Definitely sure."
What should I call her? Something not very Gryffindor so you don't bitch about it." "How about Severia?"
Harry gagged.
"You can't be serious."
"What? It's a nice name. If I had a daughter, that's what I'd name her, after my godfather."
"It's a good thing you're gay, then,"
Harry muttered before his mind caught up to his mouth. His eyes shot to Draco's, horrified, but Draco was definitely not looking at him. Was in fact avoiding looking at him. Harry could read him, could see right through all his Slytherinity. He was hiding something. He swallowed, much too loudly. Stop looking at him.
"Severia's okay, I guess. It's up to her, really."
The cat regarded him, blinking slowly. Draco was now scratching her behind the ears, and she was accepting it regally, like a queen condescending to have her hand kissed by a peasant.
"Do you like Severia?"
She yawned. He chanced a glance at Draco's face, his eyes following the profile of his aquiline nose and Roman mouth. Such a bloody fucking posh-looking git. Thought of tandem broom rides and greyhounds and fantasy Quidditch, and standing on cliffs and beaches and mountains with Draco next to him, and the smell of life in their noses. Fuck! He loved him. Draco looked up, caught him looking.
"What?"
Draco shook his head, looked down at Ars Alchemica, but it didn't inspire in him any profound methods of subject change.
"It's just... I was reminded of how transitory things are sometimes. I can look at something, and everything feels right until it occurs to you that it's gone, it was never there."
Draco gave him a bitter smirk.
"You've been breathing too much potion, Potter."
Maybe he had been. It was just that Harry was learning subtlety from his apprenticeship too, and those lessons had taught him to see the way Draco's eyes shifted to the side when he said that, sort of how they did when he'd amuse himself. There was something buried beneath this moment, something tense and closely guarded by both of them. He just wasn't sure if it was meaningful yet.
"Severia,"
Harry said to his Kneasel, choosing to ignore Draco's words. He'd come too close to saying too much already. The Kneasel looked at him questioningly.
"I'm afraid you'll have to get used to it. What Malfoy wants, Malfoy gets."
She flopped on her back and rolled around again, and he realized that she probably didn't care what he called her, since human naming systems were beneath her. She might be a squib, but she was still a Kneasel. Harry smirked at Draco, trying to unravel the tenseness. Draco shifted his eyes again. This was going nowhere.
"So, our project?"
"Yes," Draco said, and they were both being entirely too nonchalant for that moment to have meant nothing.
"I've never heard of anyone even trying to turn lead into gold via transfigurations, but the more I thought about your proposal, the more I thought we had to try it. I really have no expectations that we'll make any progress at all, especially with you constituting half of an academic pursuit. But it's an interesting prospect, and fuck, it might be moderately fun."
Harry considered this.
"That was the most rousing bit for my company that I've ever entertained."
Draco rolled his eyes. It was flattering to know that he thought Harry had been having him on, when in fact he hadn't. Sad but true. They grinned at each other.
"Which area should we focus on, then? There were 7 problems that alchemists generally concern themselves with. In fact, there is a decent biography on Fermel in the library that covers his mastery of each of them."
Malfoy cut him off.
"Well, I'm certainly not interested in making any homunculi, and it would be difficult to combine transfigurations with making the Alcahest, and I've no interest whatsoever in finding a solution to dissolve gold. In fact, who would? So that narrows things down."
Harry pulled out the broad notes he'd been making over the summer, when his reading on potions had first led him down the mysterious path to alchemy. He frowned. Neither he nor Malfoy really needed gold. What could hold their interest long enough to not kill one another?
"We could try restoring plants from their ashes,"
he offered.
Malfoy scoffed. "Do I look like Longbottom to you, Potter?" "No, I suppose not,"
Harry said, studying him intently. Malfoy sneered, and Harry was forced to hold back a smile. Suddenly, Malfoy looked serious.
"You know what we'll choose, Potter?"
he said quietly.
"Neither you nor I would ever settle for second best. We don't bother with commonplace things."
Harry swallowed.
"The Philosopher's Stone,"
he said. He felt guilty even thinking about making one. Hadn't Dumbledore spent a whole year trying to hide the last one? And Harry held it in his own hands and never felt desire for the thing it's offered? But he was 11 then, and 11-year-olds didn't understand how dysphoric life could become when you had everything you needed only fingerlings from you, but it would be another 1,200 years before that person wanted you back. Harry would wait 1,200 years if his body was up for it.
"Yeah,"
Draco said. His throat bobbed as he swallowed.
"Unless you're scared." "Never,"
Harry said. It was the first lie he told all night. Because Draco constantly scared him. He wasn't the only person who'd take part of Harry with him if he walked away, but he was the only one Harry thought would actually leave. God, Draco was ruinous, and Harry was going to give up things he'd fought for as a child just to be ruined. To be continued. Thank you for listening to this chapter of Azoth by zeitgeistic. If you'd like to stay up to date on upcoming chapters and stories, you can follow me on YouTube, Spotify, or AO3.